everyone, to the R.E.S.T podcast, where our goal is to help each and every one of you displace confusion, chaos, and dis-ease in order to heal and find significance in life. I am your host, Natalie Roberts, and I am here with the author of the Reconstitution Method for Healing and R.E.S.T, Virginia Dixon.
Good afternoon, Natalie.
Good afternoon.
I'm looking forward to finishing this next segment on transitions. We've covered many themes around that topic. Mm-hmm. And the last one that we discussed on last week's episodes is really near and dear to my heart because I've seen the consequence of these transitions driven by propaganda in the lives of men and in our nation. The points we're going to discuss today, I just want to get right to them because they're specific ways, tools used to manipulate people during times of great confusion, chaos, and dis-ease, to push agendas and make ideological transitions swift.
Even unnatural ones.
Unnatural ones, exactly. So anyway, we talked about one of the key Soviet leaders that was in charge of propaganda, Mr. Bezmenov, and I heard him speak and give a lecture on the danger of propaganda, the agenda of propaganda, the purpose of propaganda. And today I want to discuss how it happens and the stages that he shared with his listening audience, with the first being demoralization. And like we mentioned last week, it takes about 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Mm-hmm. Because this is the minimum number of years to educate a generation of students in a country before they realize what they've been exposed to. And even then, in spheres of education and academia and whatnot, what happens, this indoctrination has already taken place. It's very difficult to eradicate.
Yeah.
And I quote, Marxism and Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students by now, without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of American patriotism. And we stopped teaching civics, like we've mentioned before, in 1973.
Yes.
So the demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. Mm-hmm. So I thought it was interesting that he also went on to say that most of the propaganda is being generated by Americans to Americans.
Yeah.
Thanks, regrettably, due to a lack, he says, and deteriorating moral standards. The second stage is destabilization of a nation. They don't really care about what we eat, what we consume, what our spending habits are. That's of little consequence to them, only to the extent that our behavior can be manipulated. Mm-hmm. But it takes about 25 years for us to be completely destabilized, for this agenda to have its full breath.
So what is the proof of destabilization in our nation right now? Would that be like the protesters and the burnings that was happening in Boston? Would that be...
Basically, you breed confusion, chaos, and dis-ease, basically, with what you mentioned last week, with propaganda and misinformation. So then you have competing ideas that feed narratives, and then you polarize people within themselves, right?
Right.
And question, and they get us to question our own sanity, and then they get us to take positions, and they polarize us within our families, within our spheres of influence, within our communities. And before you know it, we're all yelling at each other, and we all want the same thing.
Right. And this, we talked about this 2 episodes ago, but it's reached a whole new high since the legalization of propaganda in 2013. So it's been a decade.
And you see why that happened.
Yeah.
And you see the consequence of the misinformation. Mm-hmm. People have the capacity to reason, and they'll always reason with things that preserve life and protect liberty, protect freedom. But when there's misinformation and propaganda is thrown in the mix, you start questioning. Look, we're questioning, and we mentioned this before, what it is to be a man and what it is to be a woman. And these narratives became explosive, right after the Supreme Court basically said, we will not take a position on abortion. We cannot make this legal or not. This is at the discretion of the states and people in the states. But look what happened then with the whole gender. So you wonder, because you even wonder, where did this discussion, it's like all of a sudden this hit us like a 2x4. Mm-hmm. And look what's happening to corporate America. The propaganda is being shoved down their throat. Yeah. But while they're rejecting it, what's happening? We're becoming more destabilized because they're creating more division among people. Yep. With narratives that are appealing to what's valuable and sacred about people, while we at the same time desecrate those people and endorse the desecration, not just of the people, but of children who don't have the capacity to reason and know what they want. Anyway, the next stage is crisis. So if something's destabilized, right, it's only a matter of time before crisis emerges. Mm-hmm. It may take up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis, which is interesting because you'd think it'd take a little bit longer. But since they're destabilized, the tipping point doesn't have to be a long one. But Natalie, I think we can see, any reasonable person listening to us can see the destabilization that's taking place, not just in our personal lives, in our homes, in our families, in our spheres of influence, in our communities, and in our nation, but globally. Yeah. We see that this is a global trend. And we see that the crisis stage is very easy. We see how in 6 weeks we saw what happened with the whole COVID thing. Yep. And then what is necessary for the disintegration to continue and for the propaganda to have its full effect, they try to normalize it. He goes on to say, if you let this continue, these schmucks will bring this country to ruin through the state of crisis. But it's not just one crisis. They're going to come at you like tennis balls. Pum, 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 pum. A series of crises back to back. And in the process, they're going to promise people goods. They're going to promise people protection. They're going to promise people paradise in order to further destabilize the economy. All with one goal, to eliminate free market competition and put the powers that be in full control. These ideologies, he goes on to say, in the United States, let's not forget, came in through our professors and all the civil rights defenders. Nobody can defend your civil rights better than you. But if you're persuaded and convinced through the propaganda and these means of manipulation and misinformation, you slowly begin to believe that, well, they have information you don't have. They know things you don't know. Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, while this information's coming at us through these means and these stages, demoralization, destabilization, crisis, and then normalization. As this tsunami, this tidal wave is upon us, I think it's imperative that we reason through everything, consulting our conscience, our mind, our heart, our will, our conscience, our feelings, to see if these things are congruent with that which expands our life, or does it have a hint of things that would diminish our life and our civil liberties? They want you to keep looking at another person as if that other person has greater value than you. But I want to encourage people to consult their conscience and reason with the resources that they have at their disposal, and to see the consequence of what's being proposed before they align themselves with ideology that could be driven by an enormous amount of very powerful, engineered propaganda. Mm-hmm. I often hear, well, both sides create and distribute propaganda, and that's not true. Propaganda has a very specific agenda.
It's specifically to change and manipulate a belief system.
And they want to start with you.
Yeah.
They want you to question reality, to question reason, to believe that you do not have the education, the means, or the resources to rise up and reason and give an opinion about something. And for decades now, people are being silenced and are being really shamed. And frankly, I think that comes from the pit of hell, because the most important resources every individual has is their spirit. And they can discern with their mind, their heart, their will, their conscience, their feelings, their soul, what is true and what is false, what is right and what is wrong, what is life-giving and what's going to diminish light. And of course, we have our very anatomy that bears witness of the truth of those things. So that is so at the heart of rest, that I just want to encourage people to be thoughtful about the propaganda that's coming at them and to weigh out the thoughts that inform them.
Yeah. And something that I would say, you know, some of this might be very hard to swallow, right? Because it sounds outlandish. It sounds like it can be the plot of a book. You know, you're thinking about this whole thing. And I mean, it's very Orwellian, right?
Well, it's a story of nations.
Oh, 1,000%.
Study history, you see these patterns played out.
Right. But if for some reason it's hard for one of our listeners to swallow, there is actually something that you can go and look up. And you just look it up on Google, look it up on YouTube. You just type in news channels, same script. And there's a few video compilations. And this is mainly done by the Sinclair Broadcast Group. That's usually where these videos are coming from, is multiple local news anchors that, and it's across the United States, that somehow have the same exact script that they are reading, basically, you know, to their local news station. And so it just goes to show that this is something that is rampant in our nation. And I'm sure that it's rampant in others, but we're really seeing it now. We're seeing the division. We've already seen the demoralization. And now, you know, we just got through a crisis, which is COVID, and there's talk about another one eventually coming as well. We don't know what it is, but already the White House has alluded to it. The Pentagon has alluded to it. Bill Gates has alluded to it. So,
well, they need to keep us in that crisis mode.
Yes, and in fear. Absolutely. So if it's hard to swallow, I encourage you to go and just watch this. So at least, you know, you have something that you can tangibly see.
And again, all with the intention of displacing confusion, chaos, and disease. Check out these resources and then decide for yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie.
Thank you, Virginia. All right, everyone. For updates about REST and this podcast, please visit our Instagram or Facebook, The Place of REST. If you'd like more information about Virginia or to support and join the cause of REST, please go to virginiadixon.com/collaborate or call 949-289-5935. Thank you for listening to REST with Virginia Dixon. We'll see you next week.